Welcome to Education in the Community. I am your host, Reverend Robert L. McKnight, and we are privileged to have as our guest today the esteemed and distinguished stage actor, playwright, producer, as well as educator, Dr. Michael Lange. Welcome.
Thank you for the introduction. That was very warm. Wow.
I'm hoping that would serve as a reading for one of your productions.
It shall. It is, and it's very good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And today we're going to discuss war and peace, because it appears as though humanity is at a state of war, and there is, in the interim, an absence of peace, both internal as well as external. And so we want to cite perhaps some examples domestically as well as internationally. And hopefully we will have time to talk about a possible solution, because to cite a problem should be at the same time to suggest a solution. And so, Michael, before the show, we were talking about Ferguson, Missouri, and a young man by the name of Michael Brown, who lost his life at the hands of a police officer. And as we understand from the media, in the process of surrendering, that he had both hands raised. He was originally shot in the back, and the young man said that he turned around and he raised both hands, realizing that he had been shot, and he continued to fire upon him in the presence, it appears, of several witnesses. And it takes me back to the Rodney King incident there in South Central. You're so young, but it also takes me back to Watts. I was in Riverside, California, when Watts exploded, and here a highway patrol stopped two biological brothers, two young African-American men. And you know the rest of the story. And from someone told their mother, the mother came, the mother got pushed, and it escalated from there. And then, of course, we can look at almost simultaneously at the explosion in Detroit as well as in Newark. And so it appears as though there was not enough time for healing, or no real healing took place, that the wound was left to fester, and now it is open and it is running again.
I think we're living in a time, this particular crossroad, I was in the Watts riot in 1965 in August. It was a tinderbox. It was the level of frustration that somebody gets stopped and something happens, and then the frustration just, exponential. I saw bullets flying. I saw the National Guard, the fire trucks. It was amazing. They were burning their own homes. This is the level of frustration that black folk were feeling in 1965. So we're living in a time where there's a tale of two cities. That is, here is a police officer whose job it is an officer of the peace. And had Michael Brown been 85 years old and a woman, would he have done the same thing? But the way the law works, when you're an officer of the peace, you keep the peace for the 85-year-old woman as well as the 18-year-old black boy. You know, so we're living in a time when it's passing the tone test, meaning that the tone of your voice. If you're gruff, if you're rough, if you're confrontative, you're liable to go to jail that night. But if you ask the officer to do his job and tell him, I'm going to go to my wallet and pull out my license and do your job, because you are an officer of the peace. They're trying to resolve a conflict of some type, and apparently your presence here needs to help explain. So you just pass that tone test. So we don't pass the tone test. The jails, the prisons, there are over 1 million black folk in these penitentiaries, and there aren't 1 million black folks in all of the universities combined in this country. So we have more in prison than we have in colleges. And so this is the tale of two cities, and we are not in what some would say we are, post-racial America, because there is an undercurrent that's still going on that is alive and well. That's that festering wound that we speak to. And there are at least 100 cities that are a potential tinderbox right now because of this Michael Brown case. So that's the situation that we've inherited, and when we talk about a solution, we have to go to the root of why this exists the way it is. This racial profiling is a part of it.
Yes.
And so you wind up not understanding the police. I wanted to be a police officer at one time in my life, but I'm part of that system, and I'm not the person that's in charge to change how the police work should go down. But you know, it's unfortunate. My mom, who is going to be 90, lived through a depression, lived through a world war, lived through the civil rights movement. She said that she has never seen it as bad as this. We're losing black young men every day in America.
Now, let me share with you, you said because of the tone of the voice.
Yes.
It could make the difference in terms of the outcome of a police stop. What about skin tone? Did that play a part in it, that it happened to be an African American?
Well, that's where the tone test exists, just for us.
Okay.
That is, if I was not an African American and was white, then I don't necessarily need the tone test, but you definitely need it if you are black, because there seems to be a war on crime, and the racial profiling is part of that. And so we wind up, I mean, you can take a look at the records of how many people have been stopped. You take a look at the unemployment rate. Why is it 3 times as high as the national rate among black folk? You know, it's because it's the access, and it's the leveling the playing field through some type of affirmative action is not the answer. You know, we have to get to the root of the issue. We are all one race.
Yes.
The human race.
Humanity.
And if we can train our police officers to keep the peace for this one race and not divide us into black, brown, red, yellow, and white, that's where the politics begin to enter. And so I'm less than you, I'm more than you. That's the person we need to talk to and get training, because we're all God's children.
I agree. Now, you speak of a war on crime. I recall about that same time, definitely shortly thereafter, maybe 1967, 68, we knew him as Stokely Carmichael. He died Kwame Ture. And Stokely used to come to this area when Merritt College was on then Grove Street. After the assassination of Dr. King, it became Martin Luther King Way. And during the Johnson administration, that period of pacification, he declared war on poverty.
Yes.
And I never will forget Stokely when he was talking to a group of us. He said, you have to be careful of labels. Labels can kill you or a movement. He says, wherever you declare war, you know that there are going to be casualties, even if by friendly fire.
Right, yeah.
And so you are creating a problem with the language. We got to deal with how to get rid of war.
That's right, yeah.
In war, there are only 2 outcomes. You are either a winner or a loser.
Yeah. Yeah, that it seems to be that the original intent of the United States was in the pursuit of life, liberty, in the pursuit of happiness.
Yes.
That word happiness stands for in the pursuit of money, because apparently they were equating happiness with being rich or being well paid or whatever that happens to be. But that's the one thing that has been kept from us as black folk for a long time. That is, we don't get access to the jobs, we don't get access to the neighborhoods that we like to live in. And so this pursuit of happiness, this pursuit of life and liberty was not originally intended for the slave. We have to understand that we have that 3/5 clause, it's in the Constitution. Yes, it was amended. So we have a historical problem here where the war on poverty actually was the gateway that opened up more and more crime, more and more poor people. It's whatever this war is on that we think we're going to eliminate, it's actually going to create more of that madness.
Like the war on drugs, for instance?
Yes, and that's when the drugs started coming in to the neighborhoods. And so these are the watchwords, but what they're not doing, what happens when we start fighting for peace? You know, what happens when we allow a person to become what they call all they can be, and we celebrate that? That's when we know that we're over that issue of you're different than me. I am my brother's keeper. So we have a religious, spiritual war going on, and then we have the physical, external war going on, and nobody is talking about it. Take this Michael Brown. They released the police officer's name that shot him. Then they released a video of a store being robbed from some cigars. And what they want you to know is that this is all tied into the shooting of Michael Brown to justify it. But the problem is that why would Michael have to go get those cigars in the first place? It's not healthy. You know, he needed to pay for it if he wanted it. It's just that he has been put with the have-nots. He's been kept out of the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He was pursuing maybe what he calls his happiness. But to be raising your arms and to be shot as a result means that there's a whole lack of sincerity on the police officers' training. I mean, what I thought about, because I work with the city of Oakland and I was able to work with the police officers because they're part of the city, was not to put the bullet in the first chamber. So that when you pull that trigger, you think about it. I just took a life. But there's nothing in that particular gun. So what I'm suggesting is that we need to stop and pause and think, because those split seconds, people would want to change their life if they could take back a split second when they pulled the trigger, or when they were reaching for the taser gun and pulled the gun out instead with Oscar Grant. And if there was a way to just stop that, I mean, because the speed is not important, how fast you do it. Sometimes it's the accuracy of getting the right thoughts in line.
Speaking of thoughts, and to allude back to something you said earlier, let me say that in reference to the police stops, Watts in 1965, a police stop, and I really had not taken note of the fact that it was in 1965. Of course, I knew it was in the mid-60s, but I had not taken time to do the math. As I sit here and did the math, that's almost 50 years. That's 49 years.
Well, it was this month of August. I think it was August the 16th or 17th. So we're very close to, we're right on the anniversary.
That's 49 years.
Yeah.
Next year, it will be 50 years. Now, sociologically speaking, we define a generation as 25 years. And so there are 4 generations in a century. And so now there's been 2 sociological, not counting the biological generations, but there have been 2 sociological generations to pass. And we're still going through this same vicious cycle.
Yeah, because nothing changed 2 generations ago. You have to change the intention of the heart. That's what's going to take that bullet out of that chamber. That's what's going to give that young person an opportunity to respond, rather than to react. We have to make the change happen. Otherwise, we get more of the same.
Yes.
And so that's what we've been seeing, more of the same. And then the war on crime, the war on poverty, all these different acronyms and presidents come in and out. They are not the people that need to go through the training. It's the person who has that license for that gun to take a life. They need to prove, you need to give them situations. And I've seen it. I've seen Oakland. I remember I was at Starbucks one time, and these young teens were kind of bothering this police officer who was in line just getting his coffee. The guy turns around and he says, well, would you like to be a police officer someday? And he had his homies with him, his gang members with him. So he had to front him off, but then he thought about it. Well, what does it take to become a police officer? He says, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll come back through here and we'll sit down and I'll tell you through the whole training, everything you need to know. Now, this was a black police officer who seemed to know himself and had a confidence and wasn't afraid of this young black kid. This black kid was behind him and catcalling him, trying to irk him in some way. And he just couldn't find this police officer's button, other than he wanted to help him, to support him, to put him into a track where if he wanted to become a police officer, this is what you would do next. So he completely changed the tone of where this conversation was going. That was a police officer's choice, because this kid was getting ready to get into a confrontation, and I could see it. So there are examples, and so that example needs to be at least in probably 300 or 400 cities, urban city centers across this nation, to give them the type of training to diffuse or to disarm a potential powder keg.
Now we are on the right track. Now, I was looking online a minute ago to change the attitudes, and we are not singling out Ferguson, because the other day with Oscar Grant, it was Oakland. It could very well be Los Angeles. A month ago, it was New York in the chokehold. But there in Ferguson, small community in Missouri, African Americans make up 86% of all vehicle stops, according to the State Attorney General Office in Missouri. 93% of that 86% of the vehicle stops result in arrest. Of everyone arrested last year, this is from 2013, 85% of the arrests were African Americans. 92% of that 85% were arrested for disorderly conduct.
Yes, but we are less than 10% of the nation's population.
Yes.
So what's wrong with this picture?
And that's throughout the country. And so what we have to look at is, as you said before, how do we change the heart, not this muscle? How do we change the attitude? How do we change the spirit of those who have taken an oath to uphold the law? And how do we reach on the inside? I hear you, and we did so much of this in the 60s, these touchy-feely workshops. But how do we meaningfully begin to bring about a change that will uplift all of humanity, and we can begin to constructively build this civilization?
Yeah, well, first, the biggest problem is that people don't feel empowered, so they protest, like we are seeing these protests where cities burned in reaction to Dr. King when he was murdered, Medgar Evers. We see that the only tool that the community has is to throw something at something, maybe with in a bottle with gasoline in it, or whatever the case may be. And so we're seeing these protests happen, and we're talking about how do we make that change. And yet, technically, through the vote, we are the people, and the people have the power. And so we have these mottos, you know, power to the people, all of those kinds of things. But how do you transition a street protest into sitting at the table with the mayors or with the police commissioners and things? We've separated the church from the state. That was a huge separation, because we're talking about a spiritual transformation in the state. But we've separated the church out. And it doesn't matter if it's Yahweh or Jehovah or Allah, whatever we pray to that is the greater good, we know that that's probably where the best solution and answer is, that I am my brother's keeper, because that's what's known on all four corners of this world that we live in. So part of it would be, you know, you do sensitivity training, we talk about the touchy-feely kind of stuff. I would prefer something along that order than a street protest. When I watched the 99 percenters occupy Oakland, they were angry because they're not part of that 1%, or that they're not inclusive, not being heard. So what we're saying is that what we need is to be able to put our feet under the table and talk to our city council reps, talk to our police officers in our neighborhoods, do some community work. I mean, we could create opportunities. The Police Activities League is a good example, where we see a police officer not with a gun and a uniform, but we see them dressed to play softball or volleyball or soccer or something. You know, we need more of those kinds of things that get at the spirit, that this is a good person. Yes, they are the police officer, but did they make the law? No. Do they have to enforce the law? Yes.
Now,
that somebody else made.
But it's how you go about enforcing that law. I don't think I would want to live in a society. It's possible in some of our ancient societies we're self-governed. Mm-hmm. Because you see, when you are a righteous individual,
okay,
and you understand truth and you practice it, you become a law unto yourself. However, until that day arrives, I don't think I would want to live in a society without laws.
Yeah.
And if there are laws, there must be someone to enforce them.
Yeah.
And so the question, as we move to our conclusion, how do we move from protest to this process?
Yeah, well, that's the $64,000 question. Somebody has stepped up to the plate and they've been assassinated. Okay, somebody has told so much of the, quote, truth and the personal laws that they live by that they lost their life. So we no longer have their counsel, and we can speak to the number of, you know, black leaders that have lost their lives, at least the people that stepped up and said this is insane, and certainly Martin comes to mind. But for his part, Marcus was trying to make the world a better place. Marcus Garvey, certainly Elijah Muhammad was. You know, they saw a solution. They said, you know what, this integration isn't going to work. It's just not going to work in our lifetime. Why would you? And Malcolm said this. Why would you integrate into a house that's on fire? America is on fire, and we are running our feet into that fire just because we want to be part of that. And if 2 generations has not shown us that we don't want to run into a burning house, then you have to come up with an alternative. I think the African American people have been the soul and the spirit of this nation.
Yes.
For having to fight for citizenship,
all right,
having built the White House,
yes,
and all of the great city halls around this country, and then you see immigrants coming in, getting bankrolled and financed and opening businesses, and yet you have taken these people who have been here in every war,
marginalized,
and
yes,
you marginalized them. So that is the day of repentance, the day of reckoning, the day to come to terms with why I have to put my finger on you to keep you down. If we can get to that issue and release it, I'm not talking about you can entertain me, Michael Jackson, but we've done heart surgery, we've done law, we've done every field, even given the profiling that we've been through.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you know Malcolm well, the character of Malcolm. There is a film, I have that film, I have to retrieve it. I think it was 16 millimeter, the real. And it ended when the commentator, interviewer asked Malcolm in an interview, and he says, well, Malcolm, what is the price of freedom? Mm-hmm. And Malcolm said, the price of freedom is death.
Yeah.
And they end the film right there. What is the price of this ultimate freedom?
Yeah, I've toiled with that because I understand ultimately freedom is freedom from the snares and the hooks that this physical world has placed on us. And Malcolm's transcendence said that the price for that type of removing of the hooks is death, because in death, that's the next stage of life. Once we come to terms with our mortality, our finiteness, then we move to the next stage. But how does that play in Chicago or in Oakland or San Francisco? I'm not going to die just to be free. But once you reach that level, and I think he was there, he saw that the ultimate freedom is death. And so when he said that, and he just said it so quickly. I mean, he didn't
so quickly
think about it. He just, the price of freedom is death.
So you've seen that.
Yeah, I've delivered that line
okay.
as an actor, you
yes.
know, and he says it's freedom for everybody or freedom for nobody. Okay, so it's the ballot or it's the bullet, and if you are not ready to pay that price, then don't use the word freedom in your vocabulary. Listen, I want to thank you for doing a wonderful interview today.
It was my pleasure.
Yeah, I think we have a few little gems in there that we can dust off, polish off, and make them nice and shiny. But there is a tremendous spiritual need for a solution. So I'm hoping that we as an audience can go into our heart of hearts.
Now you're talking.
Where we see a greater good, that I am bigger than this, that we can do better than this. Because these killings are numbing our societies. You know, there's at least 100 cities right now that are either up in protest or mourning. And so we need to do something about this, because once we figure this one out, then I think Malcolm's statement that the price for freedom is death. No, the price for freedom is the ability to be who you are. In America, this is one of the few places in the country where that can happen. Thank you, and take care.